This episode of Four Strings and the Truth is sponsored by The Bastard Instrument, a cultural history of the electric bass. We'd like to congratulate Chris Paglia, who correctly answered last week's trivia challenge. The question, what was the list price for the first Fender Precision bass, all the way back in 1951? And the answer is $199.50, which amounts to a little over $2,400 today. A pretty penny indeed. Chris will be receiving a copy of the book for his troubles. For more facts like that, listen into this episode's interview segment with Brian F. Wright, the book's author. We'll also have another trivia question for you, so you still have a chance to win your own copy of The Bastard Instrument. And, you could always just buy it on Amazon or at your local bookseller and support your indie authors. And now, let's get into it. Yes, it's the droning bass line heard around the world. And that can only mean one thing. Klaus is in the house. That's Dead Kennedys legend Klaus Flouride, to be exact, the co-founding member of the band whose melodic playing underpinned their unique, surf-drenched sound. Klaus, real name Jeffrey, tells us about his musical upbringing and the creative conception of a band that in many ways established a template for sardonic, political, hardcore music. Original singer Jello Biafra is long gone from the lineup, but the DKs remain live standard bearers and rabble-rousers. And Klaus is in the process of getting his groundbreaking solo work out to the masses. He's got a lot of cool stuff to say, so let's hear it. Klaus Flouride, welcome to Four Strings and the Truth. I'm really, really glad you were able to do this with us. We've been excited to have you on the show and talk about your journey, Dead Kennedys, your solo material, just your life in music, all 70-something years of it.
Yeah, it's been a while. I thought this was Four Strings and Tiny Little Fibs, though. So do I have the wrong... I don't know if I have the wrong broadcast as per usual, but anyhow, we'll try it.
Usually I'm the one making the fibs, or not on purpose, but I'll say something. Feel free to fact check me in real time. I go beyond Wikipedia in my research, but sometimes other people publish things that aren't correct either. So
I just researched myself for the first time in quite a while in prep for this, and I found all sorts of stuff about myself up there. Plus, there's a whole lot of Klaus Flourides out there. I was really surprised about that. But it's kind of a funny problem.
Some of you in Dead Kennedys had stage names. Yours, obviously. Ray just didn't use his last name, but East Bay Ray. And obviously, Jello Biafra is definitely not his birth name.
No. DH, that was Darren Henley, which is the DH's, and Peligro, which is because he liked a caution sticker on a big, huge industrial paper cutter thing that had the fingers being sliced and said Peligro and had blood flying and everything. He said, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, because for a drummer, that could be a problematic injury.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry about his passing in 2022. It was real shock, and I'm sure, obviously, for you and your bandmates, all of them.
Yeah, well, he had been sick for a little while, and he was playing right up basically till a day or two before he died, I think.
Wow.
And he basically fell because of possibly interaction with the meds that he was taking and stuff, and he bonked his head, and that was the end of that.
Young guy, too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Anyhow, it was not totally a surprise, but it was a sadness all the same. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw the reunited DK's show in the early 2010s. I don't think you were on that show.
There is one tour that I missed on because of medical stuff. Bass player was Greg Reeves, who played in Jumbo Shrimp, amongst other things.
Okay.
And he plays in Killer Smiles, Ray's other project.
That's right. He was actually really good. Solid replacement. Unfortunately, I was a little too young to see the original lineup of DKs back in the late 70s. We were starting to go to shows, but in my memory, Dead Kennedys didn't come east as much. We'd see some of the UK bands that came over and played at the Palladium in New York, but I don't recall a ton of announcements about Dead Kennedys shows on the East Coast. I think you would play in Trenton a lot at City Limits and stuff.
We played City Limits a few times. We played New York a bunch of times. In the city, there was Irving Plaza, Bonds, the club that was at Bonds, whatever.
Right.
It might have been called Bonds.
Yeah,
we played
Bonds
there.
International Disco or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
The Clash were there for 2 weeks because they oversold it, yeah.
So, yeah, we played the city a bunch back in the days.
And then most recently, either your singer is your bandmate and my friend Skip, Ron.
Oh, so you know Skip?
Yeah. He put us in touch.
He's been with us for like 15 years now or something like that.
2008, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird connections here. Somehow we became friendly in the early 2000s. We even played music and recorded an EP together that we both wrote songs on. He also needed a place to live. So for a while, he was living with my family in suburban New York. He was just getting his day gigs going. So he was my daughter's nanny. And honestly, an amazing nanny. He was great. In person, he's extremely chill and quiet and humble and just really warm guy.
Oh,
I was
Skip
so
is.
happy.
He's a sweetheart. It's really good to work with, too.
Well, yeah, when he started working with you guys, I was like, that is great. It's not an easy gig.
No.
I know. There was Brandon before him, right?
Yeah.
But Skip's been singing Dead Kennedy songs live longer than Jello did.
Yeah. There was Jeff Penalty in between there, too, between Brandon. Yeah. Skip's lasted the longest of anybody, including Biafra.
The proof's in the pudding, because if you go and see the show, and I went and saw it, it was just like mayhem. The pit was insane at Irving Plaza. People were going crazy. The band was like totally tight. I remember how great DH was. And it was just such a great experience. It was so energizing and exciting. And I would say now is almost a heyday of sorts for bands. You guys were progenitors early on. Hardcore wouldn't exist without Dead Kennedys. But a lot of the bands such as yourself from that era now, and a lot of whom are on this show because this show is meant to shine a light on sort of the undersung heroes whose playing influenced people after them in the rock genres primarily. Carl and the Descendants, whom I know you've done festival dates with more recently, and everyone's in a beautiful sort of glow up phase. You look around, you see these guys in retirement age on stage just ripping it up. Maybe it's because I've gotten older with them. There's something beautiful about watching that.
Well, cool. I watched or listened or whatever to one of your podcasts to get a feel of what you do. And that first one sold me to do this. XTC bass player. Colin, yeah. And he's one of my favorite bass players anyhow. And I love XTC, especially from, say, Towers of London on, once they started to get more and more melodic and stuff. Melody is one of the things that is a big deal for me. And it was one of the things that made the Kennedys stand a little apart, is that we made sure there were sort of melodies in most of the songs.
People always point to, I want to talk about the politics and the lyrical content, which is obviously so important, but also just the approach to music. You guys didn't bring forth a wall of sound. You know, you didn't sound like the Ramones. You didn't sound like the Buzzcocks. There was no template to sound the way you guys sounded.
We didn't sound like other people, and for whatever reasons, I don't think other people have chosen to sound like us. That's a good thing or whatever. A lot of it, when we were writing stuff, we'd do a tip of the hat to the residents and say, let's put a duck stab part in here. And that was like, I think, well, let's put a duck stab, or I like that. That's really duck stab. And that would be a lot in the early days, especially of our writing.
Yeah, and they were close to you guys, right? In terms of location, right? They're from the Bay Area as well. Yeah. You were relatively new to San Francisco when you joined Dead Kennedys?
Yeah, I was here for a year and a half or something like that before, yeah.
You know, born in Detroit, spent a lot of time in the East Coast, and then came out. What precipitated your move to San Francisco?
I'd been playing in blues and R&B bands in the East Coast for a long time, it seems. Well, before that, I was in this experimental group in 1968-69 called Magic Terry in the Universe. And I liked experimental music, and this was a guy that didn't sing. He just ranted poetry, sometimes in 5 or 6 different characters within one song.
Give me back the nights! The nights!
And we played music behind him that had set pieces and changed with parts of his characters and whatever. And Billy Squire was the guitarist. So got that history, and that was fine. But it was too much too soon for the industry as such. We were seen by big muck-mucks in the industry at like 3 a.m, 3 floors below ground in the Bowery where we practiced and stuff. And they got so close and there was bidding wars and blah, 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 and then the bottom fell out. And so I thought, okay, I'm 19 and I've gotten as close as I'm going to get with it. I got into first a power trio, and that evolved into being in blues bands, basically. And I did that for like 10 years. Well, to put it bluntly, a bunch of white guys playing R&B and bar bands is what the reality of it was. So my wife at that point, I followed her out to San Francisco. She moved first. I started trying out for basically the same kind of bands. And that didn't go anywhere. Right before I left Boston, I was driving cab. And I was driving 11 hours a day, 11 days a week. 1 day off, 11 days on. I was in Harvard Square sitting in my cab. Some guy comes up with a bunch of albums. They're probably stolen. And he was selling them for 50 cents a piece. One of the albums was a Ramones album. I grabbed that.
The first?
And I'd never heard them. I came home and I played it. I was a sophisticated musician, and I'd laughed at it. I thought, this is really silly. And then the next morning, I woke up with those songs running through my head, and I thought, this is curious. And so then I realized, well, it's pop. I like pop. I've always liked melodies and pop. Then I got out to the West Coast, and there's the Sex Pistols thing was going, and I finally thought, maybe I should try and get in one of those bands, because I'm not going to make any money at this. So I might as well have some fun. And this stuff is the stuff that is what I liked rock and roll first when I was a kid, because it was wild, it was out of control, it was music that scared your parents, and let's do that again. I was pushing 30. I'm an old guy for punk. I thought everybody was lying about their age, it turns out. But
seems to be the case. And also, speaking of scaring your parents, your dad was a musician, right?
Yeah.
Dating back to Great Depression, was playing in New Orleans, played a couple of different instruments.
That wasn't his main gig, but while he was his final year at MIT, they were going to take one semester off. They had a Model T, and they were going to drive to New Orleans. They played in the Quarter, and they just played on the corners. And one of the speakeasies said, come on in here and play in here, and we'll pay you. And then while they were there, the stock market crash happened. They were making money, so they decided to keep doing that for a while. And then they eventually went back to Boston. But my dad couldn't get back into MIT because they took too much time off without officially doing it. So he never graduated. He was able to make it work, but it was harder for him because he didn't have his goddamn degree. But he was always employed. He always told me, and I've always carried this with me, he said, there are 3 million boys out there that play guitar and want to be rock stars. Get a backup plan. And when things finally did start to click with the Kennedys, and there were people diving off stages and sold out shows and all this craziness, I sort of went on automatic pilot sometimes and just watched the mayhem.
While you were playing live?
Yeah, while we were playing. Because especially on some of the songs that weren't really convoluted bass parts, I could just sort of zip through it and watch it and think, yeah, I'm getting to do what the fantasy of, and I've never forgotten that the entire time once the Kennedys started and we're going, that I'm living out my own fantasy, because I knew since I was 8 that I wanted to be playing music and rock and roll and stuff. And my dad was living vicariously through this stuff too.
Yeah. Well, he got to see you guys have a real arc, and that must have been very satisfying for both of you.
They came to a show in San Francisco, and I remember my mom seeing Stage Divers for the first time and said, those kids, yeah, the kids that are jumping off the stage, yeah. She said, how much did they pay them to do that, to get things going? I said, no, it's actually the other way around.
They paid for the privilege.
Yeah.
If decency and progress is ours once more, now that we have the neutron bomb, it's nice and quick and clean and get things done.
There's sort of a backwards way to get into it, but if we're talking about you guys as sort of some of the founding fathers of hardcore, that is very much reflected when you go and watch any of the available, and there's a good amount of actually pretty good quality video from the early Dead Kennedys days. And the audience participation and stage diving, that was a fairly new phenomenon in rock music. So you guys found that as a validation and not as a threat.
Oh, yeah. We never thought of it as a threat. It was fun. It was also, we're talking about breaking down the wall between the performer and the audience. And you can't say, but don't come on my stage. You can't say that. And the funny thing was when we played Rome for the first time, they had seen pictures of us playing with all these kids on stage. So they climbed up on the stage and stood there until we told our interpreter guy, tell them they have to jump off. He says, no, that's crazy. Well, that's why.
They didn't know how to stage dive.
So they sort of climbed off and got back into the... It was kind of...
I want to hear about what the mix of influences that each of you and Ray and DH and Jello brought to the band and the sorts of peers that you had at the time.
Well, Ray and I both have dads who listen to jazz and played jazz to some degree and stuff, and big 78s collections. We both liked rock and roll since we were kids. I was the Beatleian, and Ray was more the Rolling Stones-ish end. Biafra came in with all sorts of Hawkwind type things and that sort of
krautrock.
Yeah. And I liked the later stuff was Pink Floyd-ish, more Syd Barrett era, first album, Pink Floyd, and that sort of stuff. I liked the Residents before we got started. One of the things I said to Ray when I was answering his poster looking for a bass player is he asked, what do I listen to? What do I like that's punk? And I said, Sex Pistols, Ramones, Devo, and 999 and stuff like that. And he says, okay, Devo and 999 are different than what we're usually listening to. And I had seen the Zeros down at Mabue, Ray saw the Weirdos. When I saw the Avengers early on, we were a group already. But Jimmy Wilsey, his bass style, which was just straight ahead, but really get some good stuff, that influenced me in what we did with a lot of my playing with later stuff with the Kennedys. He was simple, but he was really good. And so was Hector from the Zeros. Hector, the dignified punk rock bass player. And plus, I like Jocko from Weather Report that was coming in. One of the problems with the R&B things is I wanted to do covers. If we're going to do all covers, I wanted to do I'm the Slime or something. They're going, we can't play that, the Frank Zappa song. So this allowed me a lot more. It wasn't mostly 1-4-5 or Ice Cream and C type stuff. It had less limitations.
Right. And in terms of the actual songs, when they started to come together, would Ray walk in with riffs? Did you walk in with riffs? Were these things that happened together spontaneously in a live room?
It depends on the songs. Like sometimes Biafra would come in with some lyrics and an idea for how they should sound, and then sometimes a bit of what he was thinking of singing. A lot of the setup was he would come in with his sheet of lyrics, and he and I would sit in the living room, and I'd play my bass or guitar against whether he had a guitar with, like, I think an old cheap Gibson with one string on it, and he'd try and follow around sort of, but he couldn't quite get it. But he had the ideas, and then we came up with the melodies sometimes in the chord patterns.
Over the last few weeks, the Bastard Instrument has received glowing reviews in a few publications: Record Collector, Vintage Guitar, and Bass Musician magazine, to name a few. So here's another segment of my talk with Brian F. Wright, musicologist and the book's author. And here's another trivia question. We'll select a winner at random from the correct answers emailed to 4stringspod@gmail.com. The question: how is the bass 6 traditionally tuned? In fact, we touch on the bass 6 in this upcoming segment, so enjoy. You mentioned affordability, about how it was very important that when Leo Fender released the first precision bass, he released it in tandem with the Bassman amplifier. And he sold those for $200 each, $400, which in current dollars is $4,500. So it wasn't exactly a plaything for the hoi polloi.
Yeah, so the Bassman comes just a couple months after the first precision basses ship. And you're right, it's an expensive instrument. One of the things I talk about in the book is not just the famous basses, your jazz bass, your precision bass, all of those, but I spend a lot of time talking about cheap basses, your Dan Electro basses, especially like Sears catalog basses. I don't think it's sacrilegious for me to say that the Sears catalog bass, as much as they might be valued today as collector's items, they're not as easy to play and they're not as well constructed. But the thing they had going for them is that they were cheaper. Even then, an electric bass was still probably double the price of an electric guitar. So in a Sears catalog in 62, 63, 64, the cheap electric guitar is probably $40 and the bass is $80 or something like that. I'd have to go back and check the numbers, but I think that's right. So it's not like they are the cheapest instruments in the world, but also we're talking about an era of economic prosperity, especially in the United States. Right. And so there are a lot of kids, especially middle-class kids, who have disposable income, and this is what they choose to spend their money on. And if you think about that today compared to whatever, video games or whatever it is, young people spend a lot of money on the thing they're interested in. It just happens to be that in this era, music making, guitar playing, the electric bass was their main interest. And so I think you have to balance how expensive it was by understanding that also that there was more money around in some ways for these young people who are in the sort of middle class tier.
Another thing that I took away from the book was there are several instances of combos, whether it was jazz combos or funk combos, where there were two basses. We've heard a lot about in country music, the whole tic-tac bass. There's a stand-up bass, and then there's someone mimicking the stand-up line, maybe with an electric bass 6 or something, kind of replaying the line to give it some more punch and attack. But you talk about several combos in different genres that did have two basses going at once.
Yeah, so I do talk about tic-tac, in which the bassist is playing one of those Dan Electro 6-string electric basses, one of those cheapo, not-so-great instruments, but is functional for what they need for the music. And this happened a lot. One of the arguments I make in the book is that if early electric bassists are designed to sound like upright, at what point did they stop? At what point did they start to have their own character? And we can point to and be like, that's an electric bass line. And for me, it's really a bunch of groups in the late 50s, early 60s who have two bass players in the group. Because what you can do is have the upright player do the traditional stuff, hold down the root fifth, play a traditional bass line, and because there's another bass player in the band, it frees up the electric player to get a little more interesting and try things. So I talk about that with Wayne Eddy's records. For me, one of the really clear first big distinctive electric bass lines that we hear are on those Eddie Cochran records, like Come On Everybody.
Come On Everybody.
Which, like, to me, you listen to it and it could not be clearer that this is like a picked electric bass. But also like country bands, jazz bands. One of the things that's interesting is before the electric bass was invented, Lionel Hampton, he was an early adopter to bring the electric into his band. Before he had the electric bass in his band, he actually hired two upright players. That was just to like give the band a bigger sound, to make it more full.
Were they playing the same parts?
Well, I believe they were basically playing the same parts, yeah, for the most part. And one of those was Charles Mingus, by the way.
Right.
Moment,
I was going to say.
Yeah. You're right that there is this moment where there's an upright and electric in the same band. And that happened especially in studios, especially large ensemble groups. It really was important because it allowed electric bassists to kind of stretch out a little bit more. And also it forced them to maybe be a little more distinctive in their tone. That you needed to stand out, you needed to have a calling card, something that added a sense of sonic novelty to the record. And then from there, people heard these prominent electric bass lines, and suddenly you could hear the bass, not just live, but like through your small speakers in your car radio. Once people start hearing these bass lines that are distinctive and in the foreground and are these like electric bass lines, suddenly they want more and more of it. And then that's another arms race in popular music that helps the electric bass really come to the forefront. And this really raises a fascinating historical question too, which is that we're all so spoiled by the immediacy of music and technology that I can go on YouTube or Spotify, I can find a song, I can listen to that recording, and it's probably going to sound pretty good through my modern technology setup. But if you want to think about like, what did music actually sound like in 1964? What did it sound like in 1962? What did your speaker setup sound like if you're not playing it through a hi-fi, but you're just in a car stereo listening to a transistor radio? This experience is so much different from what we think of. It makes it actually hard to talk about how revolutionary this electric bass was. I talk about the Beatles, and I talk about the Beatles' quest to try and have prominent electric bass lines. But if you grew up listening to the remasters on Spotify, you hear the bass great. So when we get to songs like Paperback Writer, which has this really prominent electric bass line, the impact of how prominent that is lost on us entirely, because we've grown up thinking, oh, of course the electric bass was prominent throughout all of this music. And that's just not how mixing and mastering and technology worked. So we have to put ourselves as much as we can in the mindset of what that music sounded like back then to really understand the impact that these technological developments were having.
The technological impact are amazing. And from what I'm seeing, or when I speak to musicians, it's the exception that they go to like one place in a big room. And a lot of them, especially bass players, are contributing or collaborating from home setups, shed setups, whatever. But you can sound perfect. You can make beautiful quality music, but everyone is consuming it in earbuds with no subwoofers, which drives me nuts, must drive you nuts. And I think it's done a disservice to our instrument, Brian.
I think there is a lot of hand-wringing that exists about modern technology and, earbuds and how people listen to it. Earbuds are at least better to me than people who just play it from their phone out loud. That's maybe the worst quality music you could, in terms of the quality of the recording. I'm pretty optimistic about the future. Some people are like, well, less people play guitar these days, less people play bass these days, musicianship is dying. And I don't think that's the case. These things are always developing and changing and evolving. I think people really understand the value of bass lines today more than they ever have. And that's thanks to like hip hop and electronic dance music. Electronic dance music does not exist without bass lines, even if they're not played on an electric bass. So people have become so conditioned to hearing a really prominent low end that adds so much to the character of the music that I think now going forward, whether or not it's played digitally or whether or not it's played on an electric bass or however it's created, I don't think bass lines are going anywhere. I think the future of the bass in some ways is secure. And so I try to be optimistic about these things.
To dive deeper into all things electric bass, pick up The Bastard Instrument at Amazon or your favorite local book slinger. And don't forget, this episode's trivia question is, how is the bass 6 traditionally tuned? Email your correct answer to 4stringspod@gmail.com for a chance to win your very own copy of The Bastard Instrument. Now, back to Klaus.
Something like Holiday in Cambodia, he just had lyrics. And I decided to do a cross between a Velvet Underground and Led Zeppelin for the bass, a drone type thing. And then Ray came up with his lines just against that. And that one developed as a group more than anything, of falling together with all of us playing all the time. We generally didn't practice with the drummer until we had generally the outline of the song down, because otherwise, that started way back when we had Bruce. Bruce had just, if we were trying to work stuff out, he'd be fiddling on the drums the entire time. We'd stop it just for a minute.
Drummers are so annoying when you're working on a new song.
Well, but Bruce and TH could play things like Ill in the Head, which were not at all standard 4/4 type things. And the difference, Bruce is a really good power pop drummer and made that first album part of what it is. And DH, when Bruce left, I didn't know if we were going to get a drummer to replace him. I didn't want somebody that just looked the part but couldn't play. And DH came in, and it was like a locomotive. As soon as he started playing, I knew we had it.
For those following along at home, Bruce's stage name was just Ted.
Ted.
Yeah. Right. One of the things I don't know if people realize is how fucking hard it is to play as fast and as proficiently as you guys frequently did. I would say the same thing about Bad Brains. You cannot be a hack and play at the tempos. And it's not just the drummer, it's the whole band.
Yeah. I sometimes listen to our recordings and wonder, how did we do that so well? Because sometimes it got sloppy on stage and sometimes it was good on stage. But the recordings especially, some of those parts are like Drug Me, for instance. Oh, my God.
Yeah, that's one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Nazi punks, fuck off, take 3.
Back in the religious love, firmly singing for yourself. And I probably got your hair when a shot still lives inside your head. Nazi punks, Nazi punks, Nazi punks.
Nazi Punks Fuck Off. When that came out, we'd sit in my friend's bedroom and just try to decipher the chords, what you guys were doing, and it was just so fast but so precise. There's actually, I might put some links in our show notes to this, there's some incredible video of you guys recording that song and a few others of that era in the studio, and like take four.
Oh yeah, the Target videos of the "In God We Trust" recordings.
Unbelievable stuff. And just seeing you guys playing that stuff and just hearing it come together in real time is just fascinating. But did you guys feel like odd men out because you were actual musicians in a scene that seemed to worship amateurism to a certain degree?
We weren't limited by it. We didn't limit ourselves by it. We didn't brag about our proficiency or anything like that, but we kind of knew. But we looked at it like it could be good for us or it could screw us up. It depended on how people reacted to it. As it turned out, they liked it, so we were good. We did do some stuff that was basic, and we did do some straight ahead 1-4-5s, but Ray and I especially liked putting together new sounds and new progressions and some melodies on top of it. Too much to not do that.
Right. And in terms of your love of melody and stuff, I mean, it definitely comes out in the bass lines and in the playing. Were there times you would fight for something to be a little more melodic or complicated, and then you lose the battle in the room?
Yeah, sometimes I got too involved in the complication, realized it was not a good idea in retrospect. I learned the idea of having a part that supported the song as opposed to just showing off. And a lot of Ray's guitar. Ray's not a Eddie Van Halen, flashy lead all the time. Solo. He has parts that support the feel of the song and the song. The solos generally tend to be, I hate to compare it style-wise, but it's one of the things I liked about George Harrison and the Beatles was that his solos were not hardly ever solos until near the end. They were parts of the song, and Ray's stuff were parts of the song.
In other words, there's sort of a musical continuation of a theme versus an attempt to wank your way out of a box.
Exactly. And my bass parts were like that too. Things like Ill in the Head, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
But something like Keep On Kids or something, just great. They basically support the chords.
Yeah. Something I think it's hard for the modern audience to appreciate, and by that I mean people younger than myself, in your time, just how controversial the band was in every way. From the name, which would automatically disqualify you from playing certain gigs.
The older people were, the more they remembered the assassinations and the more they were pissed off by the name. I had my dad's integrity yardstick, and I had to sell the name to him once it looked at like we were going to have a group with that name. And I literally came back with a presentation of lyrics and some of the melodies and stuff. And by the end of it, he goes, "My son's a dead Kennedy. I'm going to tell everybody at work."
I know that you had dates preemptively canceled in Australia because the club owners were afraid the cops were licking their chops and getting ready to like crack down on these clubs and these punk kids.
We couldn't even get booked in Ireland back in the 80s. Forget it.
Oh, because it was during the Troubles?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. They didn't want a group came Dead Kennedys coming in there.
That's a very good point. Have you played in Ireland since?
Yes, we have. We've played there few times now. We had trouble in Boston because of the name, because we were, we played at the Rathskeller, but the door guy was this Irish guy. We turned up for sound check and he says, "No, these guys ain't getting in this club." Fortunately, our manager was Robert Hanrahan at that point, and he talked the guy into letting us sound check in.
Is that one of those gigs where your name would suddenly be the DKs or?
No, we never changed our name for gigs except for 2 times. And those were in high schools when the kids wanted us to play there. And so one time we were the Creamsicles, spelled Krem. I came up with the logo of a hammer and sickle type sickle with a creamsicle sticking through it instead of the hammer.
That's awesome.
And we played that with the Zeros and the Liars. And then we played another thing as the Pink Twinkies.
That sounds almost worse than the Dead Kennedys if you think about it too much.
Yeah, I know. There's only 2 times we changed our name, and those are them.
Well, in terms of the controversy, I guess it became a national issue when, Jello was in court, but I think the band and the label were sued over the poster in the album Frankenchrist for obscenity, correct?
I think it was the label, and being that Biafra was the owner of the label at that point, he was specifically. But I didn't get sued, for instance, on that thing. Micro, who was the manager of the label, didn't want the poster in there in the first place.
Right.
Because he says he was right. They all came back. There was no good way with that album to get that visual out there. The Geiger poster, Biafra wanted it for the cover, which we said, nobody's going to put it in their stores, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
So anyhow, yeah, that was a business decision of Biafra's and possibly not the wisest one. It was winding down, and that seemed to me to be shock for shock's sake, which we generally didn't do. Not even the name was shock for shock's sake. It had a reason behind it and stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's a different environment now. I think people can do a lot edgier things now, and maybe people don't notice it because they don't hear about it. But, you guys really took it to the limit there. It's also one of the other ways in which you guys were progenitors was the creation of alternative tentacles and having your own label, creating a label to release your own music. Was that a response to how you'd been treated thus far by labels?
Yeah, we were courted by some labels early on, Polydor and RCA. RCA at one point said, change your name and you're on. And we said, you change your name and we'll join your guys. And they said, well, don't be preposterous. And we said, yeah. We were courted also by IRS. Miles came out to Europe and to London just after he'd signed the Go-Go's and wanted to sign us. And we agreed and they signed us. But Alpert and Moss was the
A&M Records.
Yeah. And they were the father company to them, the parent company. And so Herb Alpert didn't give a shit one way or the other. But Jerry Moss had worked for Robert Kennedy, gone door to door and stuff like that. So he said, I don't want to see a Post-it sticker or anything come across my desk with this band's name on it. And I certainly don't want to put the record out. But we signed a contract with them. So we got out of the contract after recording an album and everything, which they were good enough to, I think, plastic surgery. And they
gave it back to the masters.
Gave us some of the masters back and everything. Yeah, they did stuff they almost shouldn't have done legally because some people were really behind us in the label.
They overcompensated in how they made good to you for the fact that they were going to not put out your record.
Yes, they tried to. Could have been much worse. We would have had to do another album over again, just like we had to do In God We Trust twice because the tape crumbled. And then we figured out only 15, 20 years ago that you can save that. That's why the video In God We Trust videos came out, because that tape got saved and the audio got saved and the video, what was saved of it, we could splice together and make it work.
It seems like you've always been a musical polyglot. You play some clarinet on Plastic Surgery Disasters, but I'm thinking more of your solo material. What instruments do you play, and which ones would you say are your primary compositional?
Guitar and bass, but when I did Because I Say So album, I got a sampling keyboard because I wanted to get outside of my standard framework. And initially, I started recording stuff for a film that finally came out, a Phil Tippett film called Mad God. And none of the stuff that I composed for that are on the film. They have other soundtrack that's really good. But when I was saying, I can do some soundtrack stuff for film, I didn't want to do Reichhuter and play guitar bass type stuff, which he does. But I wanted to get outside of my box of how I think and compose. And a sampling keyboard was an Ensoniq. It had little floppy disks. The sampling rate was like 8K or something.
What year was this around?
87.
So one of the first of its kind is what you're saying.
Yeah, yes. I didn't use much of their sample sounds that came with a bunch of discs that you could put in. I had more fun just using a cheap little microphone and sampling just things like a door slamming. There's a thing called Door Slammer. The rhythm track is me slamming my car door and then figuring out how to play it on the keyboard and stuff. And I never could play piano with two hands like a piano player. I can poke around like I do a keyboard on the typewriter. So it's basically my instruments that I feel proficient at are guitar and bass. And guitar, sort of proficient. Jumbo Shrimp, I played guitar in.
Right.
But in all my solo stuff, there's my guitar playing on it. And that's what I was playing first in bands when I was in high school and shit. And then in Boston, in my first year in college, my only year in college, there was this guys wanted to do a power trio, and they had a guitar and a drummer. So they said, get yourself a bass. And so I got a Dan Electro single, pickup single cutaway, little lipstick pickup bass. It didn't have a bridge on it. The bridge saddle was gone. So I used a toothbrush for a bit, and then eventually a good humor stick did it. And that was my first bass, and it sounded great. I loved it. I wish I still had that bass.
You became very well known for your beautiful Lake Placid Blue jazz bass, also stolen, but I'm not sure at the same time, but in 2013, right?
Yeah, 2013.
And then you had the luthier. I was reading up on him, and it sounds like he was like a Marine?
He wanted to be a luthier, and he had been a Marine. I had played music before and stuff. And one of the first instruments was my bass, which was going to be a surprise. It was like totally sweet of him to do it. And he made it about 1/8 of an inch too thick, so it's kind of heavy. But he was working off of pictures from the internet. He used Fender paint and lacquer from the 60s, which is illegal to use apparently now. He had to get some of that someplace.
It's like poisonous or something?
He chipped off the surface. It looks like my bass. Everybody says, oh, you got your bass back. No, I didn't. It plays better than my bass. It plays better than the Fender did.
Even heavier. That's amazing.
Yeah. And Fender was going to. We were in negotiations, as it were. They were talking to me about possibly doing a signature bass, a Klaus Flouride signature bass. And as soon as it got stolen, that was that. No, because they do a laser scan of the thing and make everything. Nope, that went down the drain. So whatever.
I'm seeing some of the people who are getting signature basses and guitars nowadays, and very few of them have had the impact of Dead Kennedys or Klaus Flouride or East Bay Ray. Does Ray have a signature guitar?
I don't think he's got a signature East Bay Ray guitar out there any place. And another person I thought would be great would be Ted Falcone from Flipper, because he's, again, influential and a sweetheart, and it's duck stab guitars. Back to that duck stab thing of like strange guitars.
There were gruesome stains with cooking oil on top. I picked out the side and used... I was very pleased with the results. Then I used my cleanser. It didn't come off as quickly. I was really amazed. The test proved to me better product.
That's fine. Yeah, I didn't time it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll time it later.
If I'm talking and thinking about your solo material, the stuff that I can find, which we'll talk about in a second, and you were to listen to it with no understanding of who made this music, it would be a long time before someone would go, oh yeah, that guy's in Dead Kennedys, I can tell.
Oh, yeah.
There's very few breadcrumbs between the two projects.
When I started to do those, again, the keyboard was one of the things that got me going towards maybe I can make an album. But I never wanted to try and do Kennedy-style music because Kennedys did that already. And I didn't want it to be compared to it as such, side by side. So yeah, I did everything else in between.
Yeah, I'll say. Really interesting, though, the cut-up stuff, the way that you kind of meshed found sound, that was extremely ahead of its time. If you go back to like early beat literature, but in terms of in a rock or a contemporary music context, I don't think Negative Land existed yet. They kind of took that idea and ran. Maybe they did.
They existed, but in fact, one of the Negative Land guys, Mark, I think it was working on that same Mad God film.
Oh, I see. But I'm saying, like, that was pretty early on for whole tracks against rhythm things with, like, cut-up sounds and stuff. That really, really interesting, taken from, like, commercials and just out there stuff. And then there's stuff that's, like, very lyrical and a little more key-heavy. At least sounds more keyboards-heavy to me. Maybe that's not the case. But unfortunately, I can't speak with 100% certainty of my opinion of all that material because it's very hard to find unless some great, brave soul has ripped some things onto YouTube.
I basically need to get distributed, my solo stuff, and I keep starting to do that, and then do something else for the afternoon, and then I don't do it. And I really need to do that. Yeah, it's hard to find the stuff. I'd like to have people know it's there without having to find it on YouTube by mistake.
Another thing I was very chuffed about was that on Bedtime for Democracy, you whip out the bass six.
Yeah, I played that bass six on the whole album.
The whole album? I didn't realize it was every song. Wow.
And I played it on our last tour and the last few shows.
For the whole show?
Yeah.
Amazing.
That was the bass I decided to use. And then when we got back together, I used it and people said, well, who's the guy playing guitar? Where's Klaus? I looked different. I put on some weight. It was later. And finally I said, I'll bring out the bass six because they want to see the bass.
The classic.
The jazz bass. But no, the bass six is a great instrument. Every other project that I play on, Legendary Stardust Cowboy, a couple of other groups that I play in, I play the bass 6 as a bass of choice just because I like it. Again, it's got a whammy bar. It's got
a whammy bar.
It's got 3 pickups. The first thing you do when you get one of the bass 6s is try and play lead all over the place on it, and then you get over that.
Yes.
I used it with a 5-year plan, primarily outside of Kennedy's, and that was a singer-songwriter, political songwriting, but very melodic stuff. That was where I did some of the bass playing that I'm most proud of. But again, stuff that's not out there. But it's got the more Jocko end of my playing is on that. Because of the 6, that's where you got the whammy is only good for things like if you do a nice chord, like of the 10th fret or something, and just give it a little bend or a little, a little bit. And it sounds so sweet. But that's what it is for, I think, the whammy. I think I sent you the Uncle Bill instrumental upbeat.
Yeah, I really like that.
That's done with the bass 6 on everything.
I think I prefer the instrumental to the vocal version. I like them both, but the instrumental, you stepped up the
tempo a bit. And funky as Funkle Bill. Oh.
So that's all bass 6?
That's all bass 6.
And it seems like you're pretty self-sufficient in terms of recording at this point. All the solo stuff you've done over the years and the stuff that you're doing more recently with the other bands and stuff, are you set up do you self-record in your house there? Or
I did in the 80s and into the 90s. And then I moved into places where I couldn't set up a studio. And I knew Pro Tools for a while, but now I'm thinking of starting another project, but having to go into a studio, which I like creating this stuff without anybody else watching. So it took me a long time to find, but I found this one place that I might use that the guy that runs the show, he's almost invisible. It's sort of like what Tom Mallon used to be like back in the day. No input whatsoever, one way or the other. They look at a magazine while you're recording.
He's just pressing record, helping you set up.
And I like the Pro Tools aspect of stuff. I had a Fostex 16 track for the lighted flickering thing, and that was nice. I couldn't move things around. I could record and do as much dubbing as I wanted, but I like the Pro Tools thing of being able, or the digital audio workshop stuff of being able to really move stuff around. I've used it recording other people, and I haven't used it enough on myself.
Yeah, how much of your time now is spent working, producing with other folks now?
Hardly any at this point. I did that a lot more in the 90s and the aughts. No, I should get into it a little more again, but...
Did you like that role?
I like being a producer to a degree. I like it if I really like the band in the first place, and I approach them and say, I want to produce you guys, as opposed to somebody approaching me. One person did that a few years back, gave me a demo tape, and I just didn't get into it. And now I listen to the demo tape, and I go, damn, I don't know what I was thinking, because just the demo is really good stuff. But it takes a while for me to wrap my brain around it, I guess.
And her name is Taylor Swift.
Yes.
Yeah.
Went to a party, and it's all night. I made 16 beers and
Here's a question. I hope it's not a sensitive one, but I think it's an important one. Dead Kennedys have over 920,000 monthly Spotify listeners. You know, that massive number. Are you and the bandmates and your bandmates seeing any of those royalties?
We are making doodly squat from that. I think we might get $3,000 a year for the whole band, I think is something like what we might get. I know I'm not seeing it. I see more from BMI, and that is small apples, than I see from anything like Spotify. I've never seen Spotify sectioned out in our accounting because
it's not big enough.
It's miscellaneous. I think it falls under miscellaneous.
And that's not because of weirdness from Jello or anything. That's just you're saying the money's not there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's maddening to me. You guys deserve better. BMI is one of the major performing rights organizations, and they pay you based on being a publisher and songwriter. So what would be then the biggest source of income for you guys at this stage? Is it when you play live? Is it just downloads from Amazon? Or
there's live. When we do live, we also do merch. But there's an income stream from the standard sources, like people downloading the albums off of Apple Music or whatever, you know.
Right. Buying downloads. Yeah.
Buying downloads. That's still an income base. Manifesto, our label now, is really good and honest about things, and stuff is being purchased. And so, yeah, everything's good.
Yeah, I would think the merch, I mean, that's probably some of the most iconic merch in all of punk rock. I would hope that it continues to be a steady earner. I'm sure you have bootleg issues just like all the bands.
Oh, yeah. We were trying to figure out what to do, and we put out a thing a couple of years back with we got the bootlegs, we mastered them, we tweaked them a bit, and re-released them as official stuff.
Those were the live releases that came out a few years back?
Yeah, those were all bootlegs of some sort.
Oh, bootleg recordings, yeah. I was also speaking of like bootleg merch. If you go to like one of these, any of these websites that sell like a bunch of t-shirts, there's like 7 different Dead Candy stores, I'm sure. I don't know, I haven't looked.
Yeah, there's that.
It's a whack-a-mole.
Exactly. Whack-a-mole is the phrase.
Is it too optimistic for us to expect to hear new music from this variant of Dead Candy's lineup at this point?
Now, that would be telling.
That's your standard answer. I want more than a standard answer from Klaus.
There's nothing solid in the works right now, let's say that. I wouldn't plan on hearing some new stuff. Ray and I and Skip putz around with ideas once in a while, and maybe some of that will see the light of day.
Are you still working with Santi? Is that his name? Santi?
Well, Santi, it's in the window, but the last few tours we've got Steve Wilson. Both of them had worked previously, either playing in a band with DH or as one of DH's drum techs. Steve Wilson played with Tattoo for a while, the Russian duo.
Ladies?
Yes.
Wow.
And he's a really good drummer, and Santi's a really good drummer, and both of them fill the void of DH pretty damn well.
That's good to hear. One of the things I always ask as part of this interview is to get your advice to a new bassist. What would be the most important piece of advice you'd give, which I will ask you, but I know you've answered that question before in a couple of interviews, so I'm more interested in hearing this variant of it, which is if Klaus Flouride was an 18-year-old aspiring musician in 2024, knowing what you know now from your experience, you get a chance to go back and start at 18, which sounds like a nightmare, frankly, of course. But if you did, how would you do things differently in terms of your approach to music?
It's an entirely different world now, for one thing. It's like asking somebody who played in one of the big bands, if you were starting now in 1972 to play your trumpet, what would you do differently? There are plenty of bands, though. There's a couple of bands that I've been listening to that I wanted to give plugs to, and they're things like the Carry-On Kids and Sarcasm.
I've heard of them.
They're a Berkeley band. And
Berkeley, California.
Yeah. And then there's groups that maybe they aren't together still, but they were doing very interesting stuff in a band format, like Oranger and That Girl, which was a great band. And Oranger had, by the way, Matt Harris. He's one of my bass influences ongoing, until he just died recently. But he got sounds out of his bass with Oranger and the Posies that were just incredible.
Was he original member of the Posies as well?
I think so. I think he was original. I'm not sure.
Really great band.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love them. So anyhow, as kids starting now, for one thing, there are still bands, is the point I was making, with Sarcasm and Carry-On Kids from Mexico. And that's Carry-On, not like Carry, but like the bird body or something.
Right. Carry-On, yeah.
Okay, there are still bands. And if you want to play in a band, you can still do it. And there are still places to play, fortunately. And there's still ways to get your music out there. In fact, they're more streamlined, easier to get your own music out there, especially if you're just a kid and can wrap your head around that stuff easier. I would say go through the standard things of getting together with people in a space and practice and keep playing and bring in everything that everybody's interested in that group of people. Find people who have similar musical interests and drive and keep playing. Sarcasm started when they were like 12, 13, 14 years old, I think.
Wow.
And I think they've sort of packed it in now because they're in their 20s, but they did it for 10 years, playing Gilman Street and stuff. They didn't get rich, but they did some really good records. They were tied in with Lookout, but Lookout is not around anymore. But it's that school of just keep playing. And that's why places like Gilman exists. And there's tons that are still the circuit of clubs that has live music. The worst part of a band, the hardest part of a band, is that it's like a marriage between how many people are in the group. It's basically really good while you're playing the music. It's the between the songs discussions in a band that are the hardest thing sometimes.
I always say the best 90 minutes of being on tour are after sound check till after the gig, and the rest of it is miserable.
Well, yeah, with us, sound check, if it goes over 20 minutes to half an hour, it's diminishing returns. If they can't figure out the sound within 10 or 15 minutes, it's usually wasted. We give the drums a long time, 10 minutes before we even get on stage.
Well, you guys don't need the rehearsals.
Yeah, this is true. But I mean, still, the gig, the part that we're supposedly getting paid for, is the best part and the least work, actually. And all the stuff you're not supposedly getting paid for is what you actually are getting paid for. The travel, the breaking equipment, the panic of somebody disappearing, all that stuff on tour and local gigs, even local gigs, carting your equipment to and from a car. Where the fuck do I park my car? There's no parking at this club. All that sort of stuff. That's what you get paid for. When you're 18 to 30, the road trip adventure part is fun also, maybe even to 35 or 40. But if you have a band that does a lot of playing, that gets old quickly. And you can romanticize it, but it's not the best part. The best part is playing the gig and the interface with an audience. There's nothing like it.
California, over Riders, California, over Riders, California, over Riders.
Well, so we're going to be seeing more Dead Kennedys gigs, though, and you're going to come back out to the East Coast for us.
We're
right?
going to Florida in September. I know that.
Apologies.
I think there may be some different words to California Uber Alice.
There you go. How many syllables in DeSantis?
No, we're thinking Mar-a-Lago Uber Alice.
Ooh.
But the problem with Uber Alice is it's the one song that we can guarantee we have the fun of the audience singing the lyrics.
You want to pull the rug out from under the audience,
we don't know
sing-along.
exactly. We're trying to figure out how to approach this. Do we? And it's getting kind of tight now before the show to actually put something out there and through what and with the new lyrics, and haven't recorded it yet and blah, blah, blah. So we'll figure that out, whether or not we're going to do it. Maybe we'll play it twice.
There you go. Also, it can't be that hard to teach the audience, just that change.
Well, yeah.
They have other things on their mind.
People, they want certain things, certain ways a lot of the time. They want new stuff, and at the same time, they want to hear all the old ones.
Play the hits, yeah. And also, Jerry Brown's not much of a threat anymore,
No, that's the thing. No, the concept of what he represented and the enforced mellowness, now it's going to be, oh God, the 2025 thing is scary shit. All this stuff. Everybody says we're living in the scariest times. They said that 20 years ago, and then things just get scarier and scarier. And it's really between that and the planet literally going to be uninhabitable for humans in 40 years. I have a kid. I don't know if she wants to bring in another kid.
I'm in the same boat. Your daughter just got a doctorate, right?
You got all your homework. Yeah, she's a doctor now doing OBGYN. So she doesn't have a kid. She's bringing them in. She's bringing them in 300 a year.
Wow. In a weird way, that is actually a politically relevant type of doctor right now because of the insanity going on in our country.
Oh, I know. She's practicing in Phoenix right now doing a residency. But if things go really south and 2025 gets enacted, she might have to go to some other country. Set yourself up for going to prison for doing your job, or just don't do your job. It's whack. It's totally crazy.
In the midst of all that insanity, continuing to tour with the Dead Kennedys is a lit match against the darkness. I mean that sincerely. And all these bands that are just out there sounding better than they ever did because they've played for so long to new generations of people. I think it's a brave and important act, and that's what art needs to be.
I think versus our albums, our live performances, I like to liken to a train careening down a track down the side of a hill, not quite out of control, but threatening to be completely derailed. That's sort of what I always felt like our live shows were like. It was, how are we going to pull this one off? Okay, the song almost, sometimes we get out of sync a little bit, but we always find it back usually.
When I saw in 2009, yeah, even with you not there, it was tight and it was raucous. It was insane.
Yeah.
I think I lost a backpack. It was great.
Well, you should come down to Florida. I'll guest list you if you can make it down to there. We can talk later and I'll get you on.
I would love that. Man, I'd love to come down. I'd love to see you guys. Will there be dates beyond that?
Possibly. I don't know. We're taking this
1 gig at a time. Fantastic. Well, if that's the case, then yeah, hey, listen, September in Florida. I have an uncle down there, of course.
Nice. Come to Miami.
Get ready. Exactly. Get ready, Uncle David. All right. Klaus, thank you so much for all your time and your cheer. I'm really glad we were able to reschedule it. Thanks again.
Well, thank you, Sandy. And it's been great meeting you and talking.
Klaus is truly one of a kind. And be sure to catch the Dead Kennedys wherever and whenever they pop up live. Also, be on the lookout for the digital release of his solo stuff and hopefully some new songs. Thanks for making it through the episode, and more goodness is coming soon. Please keep those emails and reviews on Apple Podcasts coming, especially the good ones. They always help. You can ask us questions on Spotify or email me whatever craziness you want to chat about at 4stringspod@gmail.com. Peace.
Audiation.